Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you all. From those down the road to the folks around the world. Welcome to another Potted History. This week's edition is going to be all about the VE Day celebrations. And for the next few weeks, I'm going to be doing some more Potted Histories for your enjoyment and educational benefit, whatever, for your enjoyment. Last week, I did a Potted History on the beginning of the Second World War, which I'm hoping will pop up right in this corner up here for you to click on and view and to like the video as well. But this time it's the VE Day celebrations. So grab your flag, eat some cucumber sandwiches, drink a drink of dandelion and burdock, and join me as I run through the details. So here we go. So where does this terminology come from? This phrasing, this word, VE Day, where does that come from? Well, the earliest known record of VE Day comes from September 1944. By this point, the D-Day landings had happened, the Normandy invasion was in full swing, and the march was on to get to Berlin and to ensure the end of the war and the surrender of Nazi Germany. The Allies knew that the war was coming to an end. They knew that the tide of the war was falling in their favour, but they didn't have an exact or explicit timeline to follow. They didn't see May 1945 as that exact conclusion of the war. They just saw that the war was coming to an end soon. But they did have a plan, because back in February 1945, the big three leaders of the Allied forces, that's Winston Churchill from Great Britain, that's President Roosevelt of the United States, and Joseph Stalin from USSR, Soviet Russia, they came together for the Yalta Conference in the city of Yalta, which was in USSR territory. This was basically about how they would interact with the rest of Europe, how they would assist the rest of Europe, and how they would manage this power vacuum that had been created following the Nazis' surrender and following the Nazis' sort of evacuations of their occupied territories. It was also about trying to figure out the next steps of the war, because obviously in the Far East, in Burma, the Japanese were still a big problem. The war was not completely over, but the war in Europe was soon to be over as of February 1945. But as some of you may know, the following years, following 1945, following the conclusion of the Second World War, the Soviet Russians decided to create a Soviet sphere of influence. They decided that they would use these free elections that they had promised the Eastern European countries, and they would implement their own agendas and their own governments and their own puppet states. So that's Poland, that's Romania, that's Hungary, that's Czechoslovakia, and to some extent Yugoslavia, but Yugoslavia was very much a separate entity to the Soviet Union. Yugoslavia was communist and would be communist for a long time, but they would not deal with the Soviet Russians. So this communist sphere of influence would be created within a couple of years of the end of the Second World War, and the Iron Curtain would be drawn across Europe, and the Cold War would be the new European and global problem to be faced, something which wouldn't conclude for another 50 years. Now, of course, following the fall of Berlin and the fall and the surrender of Nazi Germany, there were prosecutions, and rightly so. There were trials to bring to justice those evil individuals in the Nazi hierarchy who had undermined Europe, who had invaded, who had conquered, who had sought about the extermination of the Jewish populations in concentration camps, death camps, and labor camps. These would sort of culminate in the Nuremberg trials from November 1945 until June 1946. about 30 Nazis were hanged. Charges for crimes against humanity, crimes against peace and towards war, and all of these different other sort of charges of criminality were enacted upon them. 30, as I said, 30 were hanged. Most of them were imprisoned, some of which were imprisoned for a long time. Karl Donitz, the new leader of Nazi Germany, he would only serve 10 years. That was his prosecution. He would only get 10 years in prison, and he would die in a small part of Germany back in 1989. So let's actually move on to the victory in Europe. See, now the final battle of the Second World War in Europe, or one of the last ones anyway, would occur between the 16th of April and the 2nd of May 1945. This was the Battle of Berlin. Now, Hitler decided that the war was over for him, and he gave up. He committed suicide on the 30th of April 1945. And once Berlin had surrendered on the 2nd of May, it was then up to the new Flensburg government to administer the total and utter surrender of Nazi Germany. Now, the second in command, the new high command leader of Nazi Germany, was Karl Donitz. Now, he was, from 1943, the Admiral of the Navy, and he had been obviously the second in command for Hitler. He took control of the Nazi state, and he saw about the complete and total surrender of Nazi Germany at the Allied HQ on the 7th of May 1945. But the official day, the official sort of notification that the war was over and that the surrender had been signed, was obviously the following day, on the 8th of May. But of course, news travels fast, and even before this official signing and this official declaration of surrender, people across Western Europe had already gone about celebrating the end of the war and the victory in Europe. The official day, obviously, was the 8th of May, and hundreds upon thousands of people would come out to celebrate this victory. But some of them had been celebrating for days. Some of them had been celebrating for about a week or so. But of course, not every nation of the world celebrates VE Day or Victory Day on the same time. In fact, the Italians celebrate what they call Liberation Day on the 26th of April. That was the day in which Mussolini had died, the Germans had surrendered in the Italian provinces, and also the Italian resistance had been successful in liberating themselves from Nazi influence. Obviously, they had help from the Allied forces and the Americans, who had been sort of pushing through up in the Italian state. But the Italian resistance sort of celebrates this day as the day that they won out against Nazism and evil. Now, you'll obviously know, or you might know, that the Italians had once been part of the Axis alliance. For the vast majority of the war, they had been allied with Germany in the war since June 1940, something which I mentioned last week. But in the last 1 or 2 years of the Second World War, the Italians had been invaded by the Germans, and also they had seen a waning of relations. So obviously it was very easy to sort of head over towards the Allied forces and to resist against the Nazis. Now, likewise, the Russian state, as well as some of the Eastern European countries, don't celebrate on the same day as everybody else. They celebrate Victory Day on the 9th of May. And the Russians have even marked it as a yearly annual national holiday, where they parade through the streets. I'm sure you may have seen the footage on TV or on the news. All these tanks and this show of strength by the Russians to sort of celebrate this Victory Day, this against Nazis and, for the Russian people. Well, I certainly hope that you have gleaned some information from my potted history of VE Day, and I hope that you all have a pleasant sort of lockdown experience over VE Day. As I said, you know, this is a time to celebrate, maybe not in the same way as we would normally, but it is still a celebration and an acknowledgement of all the servicemen that were once before. So, without further ado, I'm going to finish my video here. I'm going to wish you all the best. I'm going to tell you to comment below on anything that I might have missed about VE Day, and perhaps how your country or your community celebrates VE Day. I would really actually like to know that, because although I did some research for this, and although this video is rather short, I don't feel like I've gained a big sort of aspect of the whole topic, or the whole day and the whole celebration. So please, yeah, comment below on your experiences of VE Day and how your country or community celebrate the occasion. Please like the video. It really helps a lot. Subscribe as well. Do all the things that other YouTubers tell you to do, you know. And also in my links below will be my Facebook and Instagram pages. And in fact, on this Friday, in a couple of days' time, I will be doing a live stream for you on VE Day, on the 8th of May. I mentioned last week that I was going to do sort of a big sort of fun and games scenario, and it was going to be music, and it was going to be great. But when I posted that out, I realized that actually I could get done for copyright on occasions, you know, especially using certain music. So I'm not necessarily going to do it. I'm going to try and do my best to keep it sort of jovial and to commemorate the event of VE Day. But it's not going to be what I mentioned last week. So I do hope that you can still make it to my VE Day celebration on Friday, the live stream, Facebook, linked in the description. So again, I'm going to end it here. See you later. Do all the things YouTubers tell you to do, and goodbye. So where does this terminology come from? Where does this phrase, this word come from, VE Day? Well, the earliest known record of VE Day comes as early as September 1941.